My name is Rachel Lee, and 2 hours ago, I was the lead systems engineer at one of the fastest growing data startups in New York. Today, I was fired in front of my entire team with nothing but a cardboard box and a half-hearted apology from security. The worst part wasn't the job loss. It was how easily I was discarded, like I'd never mattered in the first place. It happened less than an hour after the big announcement. Our company had just been acquired by a major tech conglomerate, and there was champagne in the lobby, fake smiles all around. I was still processing the news when Lauren, my manager, marched over to my desk in stilettos, and that same smug smile she always wore during presentations she didn't prepare. She didn't ask to speak privately. She didn't lower her voice. "Pack up your things, Rachel. Your role no longer aligns with the new structure." Those were her exact words. Cold, rehearsed. I remember how the room suddenly felt like it had no air. I remember the way every head turned toward me, how the clicking of keyboards stopped, how my breath got stuck somewhere between shock and shame. I think I asked something maybe about the transition plan or the system implementation, or even if she was serious. But she cut me off like I was interrupting a meeting I didn't belong in. "The acquisition comes with a new roadmap, Rachel. We won't be needing your involvement anymore." Her voice was crisp, louder than it needed to be. She made sure the whole room heard her. People looked away. Some stared down at their desks. No one spoke. Not even Mark, the back-end dev I trained myself, or Zoe, who once told me I was the reason she stayed in engineering. My face burned. My body moved like it didn't belong to me, reaching for mugs and chargers and the old plant I always forgot to water. Security showed up before I'd even zipped my backpack. I knew the guy. We'd joked about cold brew preferences just last week. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he took my badge. I guess corporate timing matters more than friendships when money's on the table. He held the door open in silence while I walked out like a ghost. Outside, it was raining hard. I stood under the awning for a second, just enough to remember I'd left my umbrella hanging behind my monitor. I didn't go back. I let the rain soak me until the cold reached my spine. The wind hit harder than I expected. It carried with it something deeper than weather, something like humiliation. The Uber driver asked if I was okay. I told him yes, but the mascara dripping down my cheek probably said otherwise. I stared out the window and tried to understand how 3 years of nonstop coding, sleepless nights, and sacrificed weekends could be erased with one sentence. It felt like my entire career had collapsed under the weight of one woman's ambition. What haunted me most wasn't the firing. It was how easy it had been for Lauren to make me invisible, as if I'd never architected the system that made this acquisition even possible. As if I was nothing more than an afterthought in someone else's win. I didn't know what I was going to do. Rent was due in 5 days. My savings would maybe stretch 3 months. I had no reference, no credits, no official proof that the system everyone now celebrated had come from my hands. But I knew one thing as I sat there drenched and shaking, staring into the blur of streetlights and traffic. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not quietly. Not this time. Looking back, it's almost laughable how much I trusted her. Lauren and I started on the same day. She wore a red blazer and carried herself like someone who already belonged. I had a backpack nerves and a laptop filled with code samples. We were just 2 new hires with different roles. She in client strategy, me in engineering, but we clicked. At least I thought we did. In the beginning, she was warm, curious, and always asking questions about how the platform worked. I liked that about her. Most non-tech managers pretended to understand or just ignored our side of the house entirely. But Lauren asked, and I answered. Over time, she started looping me into client demos, saying I explained things better than the other devs. She made me feel seen, like maybe I didn't have to choose between being good at my job and being part of the team. I spent months developing the core framework for our data integration engine. It started as a sketch on my whiteboard, Just a wild idea about connecting fragmented sources in real time. I pitched it at an internal lunch and learn. A few execs raised eyebrows, but didn't take it seriously until Lauren pulled me aside later that day. She told me she believed in it, that she'd talked to the leadership team herself. It worked. We got approval to build a prototype. She handled the presentation decks. I did the architecture coding and testing. I worked through weekends, holidays, and even skipped Thanksgiving with my parents that year. I told myself I was building something that mattered, something that would finally prove I was more than the quiet girl who always stayed late. When the prototype started showing real promise, Lauren took the reins on the storytelling. She asked me to help draft documents, but when the internal presentations went out, my name wasn't anywhere. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just the first version. We were a team. Teams didn't worry about credits, but the pattern didn't stop. Over time, it got harder to explain away. My notes became her talking points. My diagrams appeared in her investor deck, slightly altered but unmistakably mine. She started scheduling meetings without me pitching ideas I hadn't shared publicly. I'd walk into the office and hear her discussing updates I hadn't even finished coding yet. When I brought it up, she laughed and said it was all part of the game. That perception mattered more than precision, that I shouldn't worry we were still going places together. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe someone had my back, but every instinct in me said something was off. The final straw came 2 weeks before the acquisition was announced. We were prepping a demo for the board, and I noticed she'd locked me out of certain documentation folders. I thought it was a glitch, maybe a permissions error, but when I asked her about it, she brushed it off, said the IT team was just streamlining access for the presentation. She promised I'd be looped back in. I wasn't. I watched her present our system, my system, to executives' venture partners, and now, apparently, the company that would soon own everything. She walked them through the architecture I had written, explained concepts she didn't even understand a year ago, and smiled like she'd built it all herself. That night, I sat alone in the office. Everyone else had gone home. I stared at the code base on my screen and felt something break, not anger, not even sadness, just the quiet collapse of belief. Belief in teamwork, in fairness, in the idea that if you worked hard enough, someone would notice. No one had noticed, not really. And the one person who claimed to have seen me had been using me all along. I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt too quiet, too hollow, like the silence after a power outage. I kept pacing, opening cabinets, touching things without purpose. Then I remembered something. A contract. Not the standard HR paperwork, but an extra clause I'd asked for during onboarding. Back then, it felt like overkill. Now it felt like a thread I needed to pull. It was buried deep in an old accordion file under my desk. I hadn't looked at it in years. I flipped through onboarding papers, insurance forms, and a few faded sticky notes. Then I saw it. 2 pages printed on off-white paper, signed by me and the company's original CEO. A clause about intellectual property. My heart thumped hard. It stated that any proprietary system I developed would remain mine until full transfer was completed, including a required transition period and compensation evaluation. I read that line 3 times just to be sure. Transition period. Ownership rights. Independent valuation. I couldn't believe I'd actually fought for this. It felt like a paranoid move at the time. I was new, nervous, trying to protect myself from nothing in particular. Apparently, I had protected myself from Lauren. I needed help. Legal help. I scrolled through my contacts and landed on Derek Langston. We'd met in college, stayed friends until he went to law school. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years, but he was sharp, practical, and specialized in tech law. My thumb hovered over his name. It was late, but I didn't care. He answered groggily. I gave him the short version. Fired without notice. System stolen. A clause that might still hold weight. His tone shifted immediately. Send me the document, he said. Don't talk to them. Let me read it first. I took photos of every page and emailed them. Then I sat on the floor back against the kitchen cabinets waiting for his response. It took 10 minutes. His reply was short. This is good. Very good. They're in breach. You have leverage. For the first time since being shoved out the door, I felt something other than anger or shame. I felt possibility. Hope didn't come rushing in like a storm. It crept up quietly like a light flickering on in a dark room. I wasn't powerless after all. I powered up my personal laptop and opened the admin console for the integration system. I still had access through a separate developer key I'd created at the beginning, back when I didn't trust anyone with root-level control. It wasn't paranoia. It was standard protocol for complex infrastructure, especially one this delicate. The logs showed multiple failed attempts to override the core authentication layer. The requests were coming from Lauren's account, each more urgent than the last. I clicked into the diagnostics report and felt my lips curve into a smile. The system had done exactly what I designed it to do. Without my biometric signature, it refused to push the final module live. When I built the architecture, I embedded a deep-level validation layer that required either my secure token or an encrypted fingerprint scan. It wasn't just a password. It was a hard-coded safeguard to prevent deployment without review, the kind of thing only someone who truly understood the platform would know even existed. Lauren had no idea it was there. My phone buzzed on the counter. A string of emails and text messages had come in during the last half hour, most from her. One subject line read, "Urgent." Another said authentication blocked. The most recent one just said, "Please call me." I leaned back and stared at the screen. It felt surreal watching her flail from a distance. She had fired me, erased my name, and walked me out in front of everyone like I was disposable. Now she couldn't move forward without the one person she thought she didn't need. I clicked over to the main console and ran a simulation. Everything was stable. Everything worked, except the final handoff. The final layer required my input, not because I wanted control, because I understood what real security meant, because I cared about integrity even when no one else did. Another ping, another message from Lauren. This one is longer, asking for a call offering to talk things out. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat with my tea and stared at the city outside my window. The same system she'd stolen was now holding her hostage, and I was the only one who held the key. The conference room on the 32nd floor had glass walls, a polished oak table, and a view that stretched over half the city. But what struck me most was how quiet it was when Derek and I walked in. 8 people were already seated, including 2 reps from the parent company, our interim CEO, the head of legal, and Lauren. She looked up, smiled like nothing had happened, and gestured at the empty seats across from her. Derek didn't sit right away. He placed a folder on the table and opened it with deliberate calm. Before we discuss implementation, he said, "I'd like to clarify a few things." He slid the first document forward. It was a copy of my original contract addendum, the one outlining my IP rights. Then he added a printed access log highlighting Lauren's download of the complete system documentation just days before she fired me. The legal counsel blinked, leaned forward. Lauren stiffened. I stayed quiet. Derek spoke evenly, almost too casually. According to this clause, Rachel retains ownership of the integration platform until proper transfer has been completed, including compensation and a formal handoff. That has not occurred. Therefore, her dismissal violates the terms of the agreement and nullifies your right to use the system in its current form. Lauren started to object, but Derek held up a second printout. This is from the system repository. It shows an unusual download event from Lauren's credentials late Friday night. That access was not approved by Rachel and occurred outside normal review windows. Combined with the termination, it suggests intentional extraction of proprietary work without consent. There was a shift in the room. The parent company exec with silver hair leaned back and crossed her arms. She looked straight at Lauren. "You said the system was fully documented. You said Rachel's role was limited. Would you care to clarify?" Lauren faltered. Her tone sharpened. She claimed she was simply gathering materials for the transition, that she had overseen the architecture and Rachel had executed her instructions. I didn't look at her. I looked at the table. Derek remained calm. That narrative directly contradicts the internal documentation, all of which is time-stamped, reviewed, and signed by Rachel, including the section on core authentication, which your current team has failed to bypass. He paused, then looked at me. Rachel, would you like to elaborate on the kill switch? I nodded once. The system includes a multi-layer authentication protocol tied to my personal security key. It cannot be overridden without full access credentials and biometric validation. This was implemented to prevent accidental corruption during deployment. The room fell silent again. No one challenged what I said. Lauren tried once more, her voice rising. She accused me of sabotage, of intentionally locking her out to make her look bad. But by then, no one was listening to her the same way. Her story was unraveling with every fact laid out on the table. She looked small, suddenly unsure of herself. The silver-haired woman turned to the CEO. If what we've just heard holds true, we need to reassess roles immediately. We cannot proceed on false representations. The CEO nodded without hesitation. Lauren said nothing. Derek folded his hands. We're not here to humiliate anyone. We're here to reach a resolution that reflects the truth. He looked at me then, back to the room. Rachel is willing to re-engage, but only under clear and equitable terms. I met Lauren's eyes for the first time. She didn't look angry. She looked cornered. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small around her. I felt unshakable. The silence in the room stretched just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then the interim CEO cleared his throat and asked what I would need to return. I didn't rush my answer. I wanted every word to land with clarity, not vengeance. I told them I had 3 conditions. First, I wanted full compensation for the system, not just a paycheck, but a formal valuation with the appropriate licensing terms. This wasn't a favor, it was a business transaction. Second, I wanted proper credit. In every document, every press release, every internal memo. No more pretending someone else had done the work. The platform bore my fingerprints in every line of code, and the world needed to know it. The third condition was harder to say, but it mattered most. I wanted the CTO title, not as a power move, as a statement. I had built the foundation of their future. I would not come back as someone's assistant. There was a pause after I finished. A long one. The board members exchanged glances, some already nodding. The parent company reps asked a few clarifying questions, but no one objected. Not one person defended Lauren. She tried to speak, said I was overreaching, that I was being emotional, that this would set a bad precedent. But the words didn't hold. Not anymore. Her narrative had unraveled thread by thread right there in front of everyone. Derek slid the draft agreement across the table. No one pushed back. The CEO picked up a pen. So did legal. My name was written clearly in every clause. As signatures went down, Lauren stayed seated, arms crossed, jaw tight. I didn't look at her to gloat. I didn't need to. The damage was already done, not by my hand, but by her own. The truth had spoken for itself. And that was enough. The company atrium was packed with people when I arrived. Most were gathered near the front, where folding chairs had been set up around a small podium. I stood off to the side with Derek, watching familiar faces chat nervously, whispering guesses about the coming announcement. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that usually comes before layoffs or leadership reshuffles. Anthony, our interim CEO, stepped up to the mic with practiced calm. He welcomed everyone, thanked the teams for their hard work during the transition, and mentioned how the past few weeks had revealed both challenges and opportunities. Then he shifted to the restructured leadership. One by one, new titles were announced. People clapped politely as names were read. Some smiled, others barely reacted. Then he said her name. Lauren Mitchell will be joining our client relations division to help strengthen external partnerships through her communication skills. There was a pause, just long enough for people to process. She stood, slowly gave a strained nod, and sat down again. The applause was thin, confused. Not a demotion by name, but everyone understood what had just happened. Then came mine. And now I'm proud to introduce our new Chief Technology Officer, the original architect behind the platform that made this acquisition possible, Rachel Lee. There was a moment of silence. Then the room broke into applause. Real applause. I heard clapping from the engineering team near the back. I saw Zoe stand. Leo gave me a thumbs up. And for the first time in years, I felt seen not as a piece of a puzzle, but as someone who had built the entire picture. I walked to the front slowly, not because I wasn't confident, but because I wanted to take in every second. Every nod, every smile, every glance from people who now saw the truth. The same truth I had known all along. When I reached the podium, I kept my remarks short. I spoke about technology as a tool for connection, about integrity and creation, about how quiet work often builds the loudest impact. But inside, I was thinking about that rainy afternoon, about the box in my hand, the way I was walked out without a word, and how far I had come since that moment. As I left the stage, I caught Lauren's expression. It wasn't anger or even disbelief, it was recognition. For the first time, she understood what she'd tried to erase, and that no amount of charm or position could take that away. I didn't need revenge. This was something better. Validation. On my terms. In front of everyone. I walked back into the office building where just weeks ago, I had been escorted out with a cardboard box and no goodbye. This time, I didn't pass security with my head down. I nodded badge in hand and headed straight for the top floor. The desk that once sat in the corner of the engineering pod was gone. In its place now was a glass-walled office overlooking the entire floor. My name was on the door. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. The same space where I had been overlooked was now the space I led. Same company, same hallway, same coffee machines humming in the background. But everything felt different. Not because of a title, because of what I knew now. That my work spoke for itself. That truth had a longer reach than pride ever could. I sat down, opened my laptop, and skimmed through my inbox. Dozens of messages, welcome notes meeting, invites, media requests. Buried in the middle was one with a familiar name, Lauren Mitchell. The subject line was simple. Congratulations. The message, not so much. It was bitter. She claimed I'd maneuvered the board against her, said this wasn't over, that I wasn't built for politics, that I might run the system, but I'd never survive in the games above the code. I read it twice quietly. Then I clicked delete. I didn't feel anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. Her words no longer held weight. They didn't sting. They didn't matter. I had spent years proving myself to people who never cared to look past the surface. Now I had nothing to prove. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city. It buzzed like always. Rushing people, endless meetings, the hum of ambition in every direction. But inside me, everything had slowed. I wasn't racing anymore. I had arrived. Real revenge isn't about crushing someone else. It's about building a life so full, so rooted in truth, that no one else gets to define your worth. It's not loud. It doesn't demand applause. It's sitting in the seat they said you'd never earn, and knowing you didn't steal it. You earned it. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every quiet moment where you chose resilience instead of rage. That's what real revenge looks like. Not fire, not fury, just peace. And the sound of your own footsteps walking forward. If you've ever had someone take credit for your work or make you feel invisible when you showed up with everything you had, then you already know what this feels like. That quiet kind of pain. The kind that doesn't scream but settles in your chest and makes you question if you're even seen. I told this story because I know I'm not the only one. There are people out there right now sitting in offices where their names are left off the slide decks. People pulling late nights while someone else gets the handshake. If that's ever been you, I hope this reminds you of something important. Your worth doesn't disappear just because someone else refuses to recognize it. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your experience. Drop it in the comments. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet strength, about rising back up, go ahead and subscribe. Not because I asked, but because I believe we're all carrying something we haven't said out loud yet. Maybe this is the place to start.